This is a Vision Australia radio podcast.
This is Studio One on Vision Australia Radio.
Hello, I'm Lizzie.
And I'm Sam.
Welcome to Studio One, a weekly look at life from a low vision and blind point of view here on Vision Australia Radio.
On this week's show,
Cooking blind. Can we do it without injury or embarrassment? Sam talks to Debra Erikson from The Blind Kitchen and Katrina Taylor from BCA's National Women's Branch.
as we always say at this point, please do get in touch with the show whether you have experience of any of the issues covered in this episode of Studio One or if you think there's something we should be talking about. You never know, your story and your insight may help somebody else who is dealing with something similar.
Please contact us via email at studio1@visionaustralia.org. That's studio1@visionaustralia.org.
Or perhaps drop us a note on the station's
Hey Sam, how
Facebook
you
page.
going?
Oh, very good. It seems like only a moment ago we were talking before. Anyway...
It does.
It does. Dear listener, we are recording these shows in a condensed format because at this very moment, am actually on a cruise ship.
Are you? Where are you going?
To the Pacific, so to Noumea, Mystery Island, and to a few parts of Fiji. So that was booked a long time ago before I took over this role now. So it's... Damn it, I just can't get out of it. I have to go on a cruise ship.
I miss you already and you haven't even gone.
So this week we are covering cooking. Now, it's not quite the episode we had planned. I had planned a cooking competition. And guess what? We are going to be doing that later on in the year when we have got more preparation because it's just such a wonderful thing to do. I love cooking competitions, especially when I'm not in them.
Oh, I love cooking competitions even when I am in them.
So we're talking to Debra Erikson from The Blind Kitchen. Now, she covers a few things that might be nice and close to your heart, Lizzie. It's how to cook when you can't actually see and how to not get yourself injured. I think it's rather cool with a lot of the stuff that she covers. Have you had any specifically spectacular kitchen mishaps?
Oh, mate, it happens to me all the time. Not so much that what comes out is disastrous, but the mess, oh my goodness. My kitchen ends up looking like the scene of a crime. It's terrible. Like, I can't even make a smoothie without destroying the kitchen. It's crazy. So, I mean, if she can give me any cleaning tips, I'll certainly be in for that.
Are you the main cook of the house or is Stephen the main cook of the house?
I am very lucky to say that Stephen is the main cook of the house, but in years previous, when I lived independently, I had to rely on myself for cooking. So I don't know how I got by, to be honest. I'm not that great of a cook.
I am actually the main cook of our house, and that is because I like a wide variety of foods, and Heidi sort of has a limited repertoire, so that's the main reason there. Otherwise, she's perfectly confident at cooking, but yes, it's my job to cook, and she cleans up the mess afterwards. Yeah,
I think anything that I can make in one pan dinner especially, savoury mince, I can do that without too much trouble. But, if it's like shepherd's pie or something that takes more than one pan or any baking process or like steak, don't ask me.
You're going to like this. There is a recipe, an odds-on good way of actually cooking steak in this interview. So without further ado, here's Debra. So one of the more important things about learning how to do things in the real world, in inverted commas, is coping with supposedly difficult situations. And there's nothing more difficult than an environment where you've got hot things and sharp things, and that's just the normal kitchen. I'm talking to Debra Erikson from The Blind Kitchen, and this is pretty much your raison d'etre, isn't it?
It is.
So to start out with, at the time of recording, it's 10 o'clock in the morning, and you're in America. Whereabouts?
I'm in Portland, Oregon. It's on the West Coast, just above California.
And what's it like there at the moment?
It is cold and rainy, and we're expecting snow, and we only get snow like every 6 years or so. So it's a little bit unusual. What
made you decide to create this website?
So COVID was actually the culprit. I was teaching meal preparation at the Oregon Commission for the Blind. And then I started teaching there in June of 2019, right after I finished culinary school. I was the only blind student. So then I was only able to teach till March of 2020, and then I was laid off for a year and a half while we tried to figure out how do you teach, remotely and stuff like that. And so I decided to see if I can organize it and put it together, and it grew from there.
Now, I've had a brief look through the website itself, and a lot of it is just basically basic cooking tips. I mean, so what would you say is the most important thing if you, if you're blind or vision impaired yourself, or if you are the partner or parent of a blind person, you want them get them started in the kitchen?
You need to have basic, accessible measuring cups and spoons because it's hard to follow a recipe. You need to have things that'll protect you in terms of cutting, like we have a cut-resistant glove that you can't cut through it. The other things are things like what we call sharps baskets, which is a basket that's found at your workstation or whoever's cooking, and then a basket is in the back at the back of the sink. So if I'm using a knife, I don't have time to clean it right now, or I don't want to, or maybe it has, some kind of raw egg or raw protein on it. I can just take it over to the back of the sink and put it down, and I'm done with it for now. But the whole family has to make the agreement, or the whole household, because if only one person has vision loss, other people can glance and see it. We can't. So it's a strategy just to help keep everyone safe and organized.
And make sure no one changes anything around. There's nothing worse than having things organized and someone cleaning up, in inverted commas.
Exactly right. That's very frustrating. So we have to train the people we live with.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, are you totally blind?
I am not totally blind. I have a little bit of very blurry vision left in one eye. I have retinitis pigmentosa, but I read Braille. I use JAWS. I'm very functionally blind. No driving.
We're all very familiar with retinitis pigmentosa. It's supposed to be the darkest of all the Harry Potter spells. When did you start losing your sight? I mean, has this always been with you, or?
No. I wasn't diagnosed till I was 28. I'm one of 12 children from the same parents, and we were in Indiana, and I had a mild stigmatism when I was a child in my left eye, so I had to wear glasses, and I hated it because I was a tomboy, and my right eye always did all the work. I couldn't tell the difference when I was wearing the glasses and when I wasn't. But once I got to be an adult, so when we look back at the records, once I was diagnosed at 28, the country doctor that we saw, he saw 6 kids in one day, and in my notes, I was 17, and he said, Debra has signs of reduced peripheral vision. She should see a specialist. And that it just went undetected. Not that they didn't care. They certainly that I was officially diagnosed. I was going in for glasses. As we age, our eyes get worse. And I was going in to get some glasses. And somebody looked into my eyes and said, an optometrist, and said, you need to see a specialist. I think you've got a problem here. And that was the beginning of it. And now 2 of my brothers we all went after that. And 2 of the brothers were diagnosed with RP as well.
So how long did the actual vision loss take? I mean, are you still losing eyesight, or has it pretty much got to the point now where this is the way it's always going to be?
They tell me they can't predict it, but the way it's been going, it was in my mid-50s that it really took, where I started to have to use a cane and get training and things like that. But I still do get light perception and stuff like that. I can see cloudy shapes moving by me. So I don't know. I'll hang on to what I have as long as I can, but I'm not, I did my training because I knew what the prognosis was.
So doing what you're doing now, is it actually easier to some degree, the fact that you've actually had functional vision and been able to adapt to it? I mean, has that made it easier for you, or do you think it would have been simpler just to have the Band-Aid ripped off, as it were, and just be thrown into this as a full-on blind person?
It did make things easier for me. Meal prep at the Oregon Commission for the Blind. And for students that have degenerative eye diseases where they probably, the likelihood of their losing their vision is there, I ask them to wear sleep shades. They don't have to, but most of them agree to do so. And if I'm introducing them to a new tool or a new technique, I'll say, take the sleep shade off. Look at this. because I still remember pictures. I have images in my brain. And so I think it is helpful if you do have vision to look at it first, learn while you can still see. And then when the darkness comes, it's a little easier. But that's just my opinion. There's a lot of very high functioning people that are blind from birth that have never been able to see, and they do just fine.
I do know a lot of people who do function quite nicely without any special aids to the kitchen, for example, so that they can get by pretty easily. But one of the first things I did notice is no one uses gas stoves anymore because they are just way too unpredictable.
Yeah, and also there's a whole environmental movement now against gas stoves, and I don't do politics, so we'll stay away from there. But the hardest stove I think to learn, but it can be learned, is a glass top stove, because there's no tactile information there. You can turn it on and wave your hand above it and get where the burner is, but after that, there's no tactile information for you at all. But there are ways. I mean, as an example of that, like, this is how I teach my students that are learning to cook on a flat top stove, because that's what they have at home. And so we want them to be able to practice and do their homework. So what you do is you make sure the pan is bigger. The bottom of the pan has to be bigger than the heat source. So if you've got a little pan on a huge burner, it's not going to work. And it's dangerous anyway, because now the heat's coming up the side of the pan and the handle. So you want to make sure that the pan, you pick the right burner, that it covers it, and you can touch the top of a pan for just a second, as long as there's no food on it. As long as you can touch it for a second, pull it back, and it's going to immediately cool. You're not going to get burnt. You can't touch the burner for just a second. You can't touch a gas flame. You can't touch hot food for even a second, because the food will come back with your finger and it'll continue to burn. But you can touch the top of a pot very safely and very easily. Just tap it. So the way I teach my students is, if that pan is centered above the heat source, the top of the rim of that pan is going to be completely equally hot all the way around. Touch it for a second. But let's say I'm stirring like spaghetti sauce or something like that, and I accidentally bump it and I don't know it. Okay, the part of the pan that is now exposed to the heat source, because the heat is now traveling up the side of the pan. It's no longer covering it. So when I touch the top right side of the pan, it's like, oh, this is hotter than the left on the heat source at all. And it will also slow down its cooking. You'll be able to hear it not cooking as much. So then all you have to do is to correct it, is to move it towards where the pan is the hottest at the top, to once again get it underneath. And you just keep checking. Well, I didn't move it far enough. Let me do it a little bit more. Oh, I moved it too much. Now the left side's too hot. And eventually you can get it safely and confidently that the pan is now centered again.
So as far as cooking tips go, so I think that one of the most difficult things I've encountered, from anecdotally anyway, is cooking something as simple as a steak, for example, because you don't get a lot of feedback from when you're cooking it. Do you have a ultimate hack to cooking a decent steak if you can't actually see it?
Yeah, I do actually. An indoor grill. So there's I'm not going to name any brands, but there's a common boxer that made these grills. And what it is it cooks from both sides at the exact same time. So you plug it in, it's 350 degrees. It doesn't have any controls. It's either plugged in and on, or it's unplugged and off. Right. And it's all about timing. And, it also depends on how cold the meat is when it goes in there. You've just got to practice with it, but talking thermometers can help you assess it. But usually most steaks, if you like them medium rare, are like 2.5 minutes and it's done. So part of the thing is to make sure everything's consistent, including the temperature of the meat. An inch thick steak is going to take a lot longer to cook, or significantly longer than a 1/4 inch steak. A cold steak is going to take longer to cook than if the steak is at room temperature. So it's all about consistency and timing, and you can figure it out. But the nice thing about the George Foreman grill is that but there are other companies that make them, is that you're not required to flip it.
Yep.
It's a nice touch. We use those for our students all the time. We teach them that. I make my steaks always on a George Foreman grill.
Is there any sensory feedback, for example? I mean, if you can smell something, or mainly if you can smell something, is there a good tip to actually, either turn it off or turn it down?
Yeah, for some foods there is that information, but steaks not so much. Steaks not so much. I mean, you could smell the char on it. You certainly can smell that the meat has started cooking, but to really be able to assess by smell or touch if it's done in the middle where it's safe to consume, steak doesn't lend itself well to that. Other foods do, but steaks are too dense, I think, is probably the problem.
And they can vary as far as how thick they are. So I mean, something may seem cooked on the outside, but might be red as all hell in the very middle of it and raw.
Exactly right. And also how much fat is marbled through it. I mean, fat cooks as a different cooks at a different pace than protein does. So if your fat is going to make a difference too, how much is marbled into the steak, it's the piece of meat itself.
So as long as you're safe, is there anything that you've got to really remember when you are actually in the kitchen? As you know, as long as you don't cut yourself, as long as you don't burn yourself, is there anything else that you find is important that we don't fail at? Because everything is trial and error. So is there anything else?
Yeah. I think it's like even if when I learned how to ride a bike, they didn't just put me on the bike and send me on my way. When I learned to drive a car, you need to be taught. And so we have to give ourselves grace. Of course, especially I would say young girls are taught to be in the kitchen and cook at a young age. And maybe if you're going blind now and you knew how to cook and you're in your 60s or 70s, and maybe you were the person that cooked for your family. Everybody loved that you did the barbecue or that you did the, Italian dinner or whatever. And now you've lost your vision. It can be very humbling and scary to try and get back into the kitchen and cook. Like, how are you going to do stuff that you used to use vision for? And so I think granting yourself grace and saying, hey, I had to learn this once with sight. Now I've got to learn it without sight. Just being able to grant yourself grace. And there's so many helpful tutorials and videos and stuff out there. The information, even like you were talking on cooking a steak, the different, if you can listen to all kinds of different podcasts or listen to videos on YouTube, and it's amazing the information you can learn.
And don't be afraid.
Right. Well, I would say being afraid is a healthy thing. I would re-loop that in my mind where I'd say, okay, I'm afraid. I'm about to reach out and touch a very sharp knife, and I'm going to cut this food. I'll wear a cut-resistant glove on one hand but it's still going to be scary. And it's same thing with opening an oven for the first time. I've taught many students that are just out of high school, and they've never been allowed in the kitchen or to be near a hot stove, and they're literally trembling. And I say to them, notice what your body's doing right now. It's afraid because you are in a potentially dangerous situation, but there are safe ways to do. This is how it works. This is where the heat comes from. And they always use an oven on the first day of class. They always are able to successfully cook. We bake bacon in the oven. And so the thing is to reclassify that fear as something that's keeping you alive, but you can manage it. It's doable.
So if people are listening now and they want to know more, I found you on the internet. What is your website?
Okay, it's called theblindkitchen.com, and you can get on there. It's very screen reader friendly, no pop-up ads or anything like that. It's very easy to navigate technically. You could also write to me at info@theblindkitchen.com. Or if people want to, we can arrange a Zoom call if they are like in other countries or whatever and would like to talk. Because one thing I love doing is consulting. Like if you come to me and you say, Debra, I want to be able to make a steak and I am not really able to do that. Then I could say, well, you should probably get a talking thermometer. You should probably get a double spatula. Just point you to the different things that you'd need. Nobody needs everything. And there's usually 12 right answers to any question as to how to flip a steak. There's probably way more than one way to do it. It depends on what you're used to, what you're comfortable with. A lot of times what your budget is, what your knowledge base is.
But also you do provide sets as well of some useful equipment. I've noticed that as well.
I do. So we have what we call collections, and those are usually purchased by agencies that teach people with vision loss how to cook. So like in the cutting and chopping collection, it's got 15 different items. Everybody's not going to need all of those items, but some will need some of them. So that those are nice to have if you have a client and you're trying to figure out what would work best for them. We also have a grilling and barbecue collection, which has 10 tools that are related to grilling outside on a barbecue. I love that collection. And we have a pie maker collection that has everything to do with pie crusts and doughs and apples and peeling and just crimping crusts and pie dough bag. All of it. So there's nothing in the blind kitchen that is not specifically adaptive for blind and visually impaired people. I'm not selling pots and pans. I'm not selling, plates. And then there's an associated video on the website. So let's say you want to get I talked about the cut resistant glove. So we call it the cut glove. It'll come in its own package, marked, and then you can go to the website and find the video called Cut Glove. And in the videos, and they're very audio described. If I'm not talking, somebody else is, but I do most of the descriptions, and I tell you what the tool is, what it does, why it's blind friendly, and how to use and care for it. And there's a written explanation of every item in the blind kitchen as well.
It is very accessible. I've gone through it myself and had a bit of a look. So thank you for giving us a small amount of your time today, and have a good evening.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me, and happy cooking.
This is Studio One on Vision Australia Radio.